On the morning of March 22nd, 1987, 10 people burned to death in a warehouse fire on Aramingo Avenue in the Kensington section of Philadelphia. All young men ages 22 through 34, all connected to the South Street Crew, a cocaine distribution network that operated out of Center City and South Philadelphia. The method was execution by gunfire followed by deliberate arson. Accelerants poured around every exit. Flames ignited while victims were trapped inside. The perpetrators weren't rival drug dealers or federal agents conducting a raid gone catastrophically wrong. They were 3 brothers from South Philadelphia, Vincent, Michael, and Anthony Romano. Sons of a murdered loan shark, moving through the city like avenging angels, methodically erasing everyone who'd participated in their father's execution 2 weeks earlier. Philadelphia police would later classify it as one of the most calculated acts of familial revenge in the city's violent history. But the motive wasn't about drugs, wasn't about territory, wasn't even about money owed. It was about respect, about the old neighborhood code that said you never ever set up a man who trusted you, about 3 sons who believed that when the system fails and the streets turn savage, family handles its own justice. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. Philadelphia in 1987 was a city caught between its industrial past and an uncertain future it couldn't quite see yet. Population hovering around 1.6 million, down from 2 million in 1950 when manufacturing jobs filled the massive factories that lined the Delaware River. The city sprawled across 135 square miles, divided into neighborhoods that might as well have been separate countries. South Philadelphia, where Italian families had lived for 3 generations. Kensington, where Irish and Polish immigrants had settled near the textile mills. North Philadelphia, predominantly African American, devastated by white flight and economic abandonment. Each neighborhood had its own rules, its own hierarchies, its own way of handling problems that the Philadelphia Police Department either couldn't or wouldn't address. March in Philadelphia meant temperatures in the low 40s during the day, dropping to the 30s at night. The air smelled like car exhaust, soft pretzels from street vendors, and the particular industrial funk that came from 100 years of factories pumping smoke into the sky. The sound of the city was constant. Garbage trucks grinding gears at 5 in the morning. The elevated train on Market Street rattling past every 7 minutes. Car horns, police sirens, the distant sound of construction tearing down old buildings to make way for new developments that never quite materialized. But 1987 was a devastating year for working-class Philadelphia. The manufacturing economy that had sustained the city since the Industrial Revolution was in complete collapse. Between 1970 and 1987, Philadelphia lost over 160,000 manufacturing jobs. The Navy Yard was downsizing. The textile mills in Kensington sat abandoned, their windows broken, their machinery rusting. The shipyards along the Delaware River employed a fraction of the workers they once had. For men who'd grown up believing that hard physical labor guaranteed a decent life, watching the economy disintegrate felt like a betrayal of everything America had promised. Unemployment in working-class neighborhoods hit 28% that year. Men who'd worked their entire adult lives suddenly found themselves with nothing. No jobs, no prospects, no way to support families except disability checks that barely covered rent and food stamps that bought humiliation at the checkout counter. Pride took a beating when you couldn't provide. That kind of economic devastation created conditions where illegal economies flourished. Loan sharking, bookmaking, stolen goods, and increasingly cocaine distribution networks that operated outside traditional organized crime structures. The old Italian mob still existed in South Philadelphia, still controlled certain rackets, still demanded tribute from independent operators. But their power was fading, challenged by younger, more violent entrepreneurs who'd grown up watching Scarface and believed that cocaine money could buy them everything the legitimate economy had denied their fathers. The cocaine trade that exploded through Philadelphia in the 1980s wasn't like the heroin trade that had preceded it. Cocaine brought different money, different violence, different rules. Where the old mob had been cautious, calculating, careful to avoid attention that brought federal heat, the cocaine cowboys were flashy, reckless, willing to kill over disrespect or perceived slights. They drove expensive cars, wore gold chains, carried automatic weapons, and had no connection to the neighborhood codes that had governed street crime for generations. This created tension between old-school operators and the new generation. Men like Salvatore Romano, who'd grown up in South Philadelphia's Italian community, who'd learned the rules from men who'd learned them from men who'd brought them from Sicily, found themselves navigating a landscape where those rules no longer applied, where handshake deals meant nothing, where trust was a liability that could get you killed, where the only law that mattered was whoever had the most guns and the least hesitation about using them. Kensington in 1987 looked like a war zone. Block after block of abandoned factories, their windows shattered, their walls covered in graffiti. Row houses with boarded-up windows, metal grates over doors, yards filled with trash and broken furniture. The heroin epidemic had hit Kensington hard in the 70s. Now, crack cocaine was starting to appear, bringing a new level of addiction and desperation. Salvatore Romano was 58 years old that March, though the life he'd lived had aged him beyond those years. He stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, built solid and thick from decades of physical labor, his shoulders broad, his hands massive and scarred from years working the docks before the shipping industry collapsed. His face was weathered like old leather, deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth from squinting into sun and wind during his years as a longshoreman. A scar ran across his left knuckles where a loading hook had slipped in 1963, requiring 17 stitches he'd gotten at the emergency room and never quite healed right. His hair had gone completely silver by the time he was 50, slicked back with pomade in the old style. He wore reading glasses for paperwork, refused to admit he needed them for anything else. Every morning, Salvatore woke at 5:30 in the house on Tasker Street where he'd lived since marrying Maria Castellano in 1954. He made coffee in a stovetop espresso maker, sat at the kitchen table smoking Marlboro cigarettes, and planned his day with the methodical precision he'd learned from his own father. By 6:30 he was out the door, driving his 1983 Lincoln Continental to the moving company office on Washington Avenue. Romano Brothers Moving and Storage wasn't the biggest operation in South Philadelphia, but it was legitimate. The trucks were licensed, the workers were insured, they moved furniture for regular customers who paid with checks and credit cards. But the moving company also provided cover for Salvatore's real business, loan sharking. He lent money to people the banks wouldn't touch. Working-class folks who needed $500 to fix their car or $2,000 to cover medical bills their insurance wouldn't pay. The interest was high, 20%, but reasonable by street standards. More importantly, Salvatore was fair. He gave extensions when people hit rough patches. He never broke legs over late payments like some sharks did. He believed in the old rule that you couldn't collect from a man in the hospital. Salvatore had 3 sons who meant everything to him beyond the money, beyond the respect, beyond anything else in his life. Vincent was 32 that March, the oldest, 6 feet 2 inches tall, 220 pounds of muscle built in the gym, and maintained through discipline that bordered on obsession. He had his father's dark eyes, his mother's sharp cheekbones, and a presence that made people nervous without him saying a word. Vincent had served in Vietnam, came home in 1973 with a Bronze Star and nightmares he never discussed. He worked as his father's primary enforcer, collecting debts, handling problems, making sure nobody mistook Salvatore's fairness for weakness. Tommy Brennan was 35 years old in March of 1987, and he represented everything that was changing in Philadelphia's criminal landscape. He stood 6 feet tall, lean and wiry, with the kind of nervous energy that came from too much cocaine and too little sleep. His red hair was already thinning on top, which made him look older than his years. He had pale Irish skin that burned easily in summer, a sharp nose, and green eyes that never quite met yours when he talked. He wore expensive clothes, Armani suits, Italian leather shoes, gold chains, thick enough to be weapons, all paid for with cocaine money that flowed through South Street faster than he could count it. Tommy had grown up on 7th Street in South Philadelphia, 3 blocks from where Salvatore Romano's family had lived for generations. They'd gone to the same parish, attended the same neighborhood festivals, played in the same streets as kids. Tommy's father had worked in the shipyards alongside Salvatore back in the 60s. There should have been respect there, the kind of neighborhood bond that meant something in South Philadelphia's tight-knit Italian and Irish communities. But Tommy Brennan had no use for the old codes, the old respect, the old way of doing business. He'd watched his father work himself to death for a pension that barely covered bills, watched the shipyards close and his neighborhood decay, decided the only thing that mattered was money and the power it bought. In 1984, Tommy had started small, moving cocaine for a Colombian connection he'd met through a cousin in Miami. By 1986, he was running his own crew, 10 young men, all in their 20s and early 30s, all hungry for money and respect they couldn't get legitimately. The South Street crew operated out of Center City, dealing to college students, young professionals, club kids who had disposable income and insatiable appetites. They moved 30 kilos a month, bringing in gross revenue of over $400,000. Tommy lived in a renovated loft in Old City, drove a 1986 Mercedes 500 SL, wore Rolex watches, and believed he was untouchable. His crew was loyal because he paid them well and didn't ask questions when violence was necessary. They were young enough to believe they'd never get caught, reckless enough to not care if they did. Marcus Webb was 28, Tommy's lieutenant, handled distribution logistics. Danny Sullivan was 26, provided security, had done 2 years in Graterford prison for assault. Kevin O'Malley was 24, managed the money, had a degree in accounting from Temple University he never used legitimately. The others ranged from 22 to 34, all connected through neighborhood ties or prison friendships, all believing the cocaine money would last forever. The partnership between Salvatore Romano and Tommy Brennan had begun in March of 1985, 2 years before everything fell apart. Tommy had approached Salvatore at Dante's Social Club on Broad Street, where old-school South Philadelphia guys still gathered to play cards and discuss business. Tommy needed help. His crew was making money, but they were attracting attention. Police were watching. Competitors were circling. He needed someone with connections, with muscle, with the kind of street credibility that kept people from thinking they could just rob him. Salvatore had been skeptical. He didn't like the cocaine trade, thought it brought heat the old rackets never did, believed the young guys running it were too flashy, too violent, too stupid to last. But Tommy offered good money. $5,000 a month for protection, for use of Romano Brothers moving trucks to transport product, for Vincent and his guys to provide security when large quantities were moving. It was easy money for work they already knew how to do. Maria had argued against it. She'd sat at their kitchen table on Tasker Street and told Salvatore that Tommy Brennan couldn't be trusted, that the cocaine business was different from loan sharking or bookmaking, that sooner or later the heat would come down and everyone connected would burn. Salvatore had dismissed her concerns. He'd known Tommy since the kid was 8 years old, knew his father, his uncles, his whole family, believed that neighborhood connections still meant something, even in 1985. For 2 years, the arrangement worked. Tommy paid on time, every month, $5,000 cash delivered to the moving company office. Salvatore's trucks moved product from South Philadelphia to distribution points in Center City and University City. Vincent and 2 other guys occasionally provided security during larger transactions. It was profitable. It was professional. It seemed sustainable, but by late 1986, Tommy Brennan had started missing payments. First 1 month late, then 2. The excuses were always the same. A shipment got seized, a buyer didn't pay, cash was tied up in inventory. Tommy would show up at the moving company office with apologies and promises, swearing he'd make it right, asking for extensions he'd never needed before. By February of 1987, Tommy owed Salvatore $85,000. 14 months of missed payments, plus interest compounding according to the terms they'd agreed upon. Salvatore had been patient, had given Tommy chances he wouldn't have given anyone else because of their neighborhood history. But patience had limits. On March 3rd, Salvatore went to Tommy's loft in Old City, knocked on the door at 9 in the morning. Tommy answered in silk pajama pants, his eyes bloodshot, his nose running from cocaine he'd been doing all night. The loft was a mess. Expensive furniture, empty champagne bottles, mirrors with white residue, evidence of a lifestyle spinning out of control. March 8th, 1987, 11:30 in the morning. The temperature in Philadelphia was 42 degrees under overcast skies that threatened rain but hadn't delivered yet. Salvatore Romano sat in his office at Romano Brothers Moving and Storage, reviewing paperwork for a job scheduled that afternoon when the phone rang. He picked up on the second ring. The voice on the other end was Tommy Brennan, and for the first time in months, he sounded sober, serious, like the neighborhood kid Salvatore remembered from years before. "Mr. Romano, I got your money. All of it, 85,000. I want to settle up, make things right between us." Salvatore leaned back in his chair, skeptical but listening. Tommy had made promises before, broken every one. "Where'd you get 85,000, Tommy? You've been ducking me for months. Now suddenly you got cash?" "I moved some product, sold my car, called in debts. People owed me. I know I fucked up, Mr. Romano. I know I disrespected you. But I want to fix it. Today. Cash. All of it." Salvatore felt something twist in his gut. An instinct honed over 58 years of living in a world where trust was currency and betrayal was death. Something about Tommy's tone felt wrong. Too eager, too desperate to meet immediately. Why today? Why not tomorrow at the office like normal? "Because I got people breathing down my neck, Mr. Romano. Same as you're breathing down mine. I need to settle accounts, get my books clean, start fresh. I'm at a warehouse in Kensington, Aramingo Avenue, near Clearfield Street. Can you meet me here in an hour? I'll have the cash. We'll be square." Salvatore should have said no. Should have insisted Tommy come to South Philadelphia, to Romano territory, to a place where Salvatore controlled the environment. Vincent had been standing in the doorway, listening, shaking his head, mouthing the words, "It's a trap." But Salvatore had believed in the old code, believed that neighborhood connections meant something, believed that Tommy Brennan, for all his faults, wouldn't be stupid enough to set up a man whose family had known his family for 3 generations. "I'll be there at 1 o'clock, Salvatore said. "You better have my money, Tommy. All of it." "I will, Mr. Romano, I swear." 1 o'clock. Salvatore hung up. Vincent was across the office in 3 strides, his face dark with anger and concern. "Dad, you're not seriously going to Kensington alone. That's Tommy's territory. You don't know what's waiting there. He's got the money, Vincent. He wants to settle. I'll take it. We'll be done with him. And if he doesn't, if this is a setup, then I'll handle it. I've been handling problems since before you were born." Vincent grabbed his jacket. "Then I'm coming with you." "No, you're not." Salvatore's voice had the tone that meant the conversation was over. "You're staying here, running the business. This is between me and Tommy. Neighborhood business. Old school. I'll be back by 3. 7 hours later, when Salvatore hadn't returned and wasn't answering his phone, Vincent Romano drove to Kensington with his brother Michael in the passenger seat. The address Tommy had given was easy to find, a warehouse on Aramingo Avenue that had once housed a textile company, now abandoned for 5 years, its windows broken, its walls covered in graffiti. Vincent parked the van half a block away. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just the industrial wasteland that Kensington had become. They approached on foot. The warehouse door was partially open, hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Vincent pushed it wider, stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The smell hit him first. Blood, copper, and thick. Gunpowder, acrid and sharp. The particular scent of death that anyone who'd been in combat recognized immediately. Michael was behind him, breathing hard, already knowing what they'd find, but not wanting to believe it. The warehouse floor was concrete, stained with oil and rust. In the center, under a broken skylight that let in gray afternoon light, Salvatore Romano lay on his back. His face was a mess of bruises and lacerations. His right eye was swollen shut. His lip was split, blood dried in a dark trail down his chin. 2 bullet wounds, one in his chest, one in his abdomen. The blood pool around him had started to coagulate, dark and thick. Vincent dropped to his knees beside his father's body. Checked for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. Put his hand on his father's chest, feeling the coldness that meant he'd been dead for hours. Michael stood frozen, staring, his mind trying to process what his eyes were seeing. Vincent stood slowly, looked around the warehouse, saw the evidence of what had happened. Salvatore had been beaten first, systematically, methodically, then shot execution style, left to die alone on a warehouse floor, in a neighborhood 3 miles from his home. No $85,000, no settlement, just betrayal dressed up as a business meeting. Vincent pulled out his phone, dialed Anthony, their youngest brother. His voice was flat, emotionless, the tone he'd used in Vietnam when reporting casualties. "Tony, get to the warehouse on Aramingo and Clearfield. Don't bring anyone. Don't call Mom. Just get here now." He hung up, looked at Michael, who was crying silently, tears running down his face, his hands shaking. Michael was the middle brother, 29 years old, the thinker, the planner, the one who'd gone to community college for 2 years before dropping out to work at the moving company. He wasn't built for violence the way Vincent wasn't comfortable with the street life their father had lived. But standing in that warehouse, looking at their father's body, something changed in Michael's face. The grief crystallized into something harder, colder, more dangerous. "They killed him," Michael said, voice shaking but growing stronger. "Tommy Brennan called him here and had him killed." Vincent nodded, didn't trust himself to speak yet. The rage building in his chest was so intense, it felt like his ribs might crack from the pressure. "They're all dead," Michael said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Every single one of them. Anthony Romano arrived 18 minutes later, pulling his car into the warehouse lot fast enough that the tires squealed. He was 26 years old, the youngest Romano brother, built like a linebacker, at 6 feet tall and 210 pounds, most of it muscle from the gym where he worked out 6 days a week. He had his father's dark eyes, his mother's quick temper, and absolutely no patience for disrespect. He burst through the warehouse door, saw his father's body, and the sound that came out of him was somewhere between a scream and a howl. He was across the floor in seconds, dropping beside Salvatore, grabbing his father's hand, like he could somehow will life back into the cold flesh. No, 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 this isn't happening. This can't be happening. Vincent pulled him up, physically dragged him away from the body. Tony, stop. He's gone. We can't help him. But we can do something about the people who did this. Anthony spun, his face wet with tears and rage. Who did this? Tommy Brennan, Michael said quietly. He called Dad here, said he had the money, set him up. Anthony's hands clenched into fists. Then we kill Tommy Brennan, tonight, right fucking now. We find him and we end him. Vincent shook his head. Not just Tommy, his whole crew. Everyone who knew about this, everyone who helped, everyone who was part of it, they all pay. The three brothers stood in that warehouse, their father's body behind them, and made the decision that would destroy their lives as surely as it would end 10 others. Michael was the first to speak the question that needed asking. We can't go to the police. Dad's business wasn't legal. We report this, they investigate, they find the loan sharking, maybe they find connections to Tommy's cocaine operation. We'd be putting ourselves in prison. And even if we did, Vincent added, what would happen? Tommy gets arrested, maybe, if they can prove it. He lawyers up, gets bail, walks the streets, while the case drags through court for 2 years. Maybe he gets convicted, maybe he doesn't. That's justice? That's what Dad deserves? Anthony wiped his face roughly. What about the mob? Uncle Carmine's connected. He could reach out. Have this handled the right way. Michael shook his head. Dad wasn't made. We're not made. We're independent operators. The mob doesn't avenge people who aren't in the family. And even if Carmine wanted to help, this is about cocaine. The old guys don't touch that. Too much heat. They'd tell us to handle our own problems. So we handle it ourselves, Vincent said. The way it used to be done. Before lawyers and trials and prisons that let killers walk on technicalities, we find everyone who was involved, everyone who knew, and we erase them completely. Michael looked at his older brother. You're talking about murder. Multiple murders, premeditated. If we get caught, we spend the rest of our lives in prison. If we don't do anything, Anthony said, his voice hard, then Dad died for nothing. Then every punk on the street learns that you can set up Salvatore Romano, kill him like a dog, and his sons did nothing. What does that make us? Vincent looked at both his brothers. I did 2 tours in Vietnam, March 9th, 1987, 6 in the morning. The 3 Romano brothers sat in their mother's kitchen on Tasker Street, drinking coffee, watching Maria make breakfast with hands that shook so badly she could barely crack the eggs. She'd screamed when they told her about Salvatore, screamed until her voice gave out, then sat in her bedroom for 3 hours rocking back and forth while her sons made phone calls to the funeral home, to the priest at St. Paul's, to relatives who needed to know that Salvatore was dead. Now, in the gray morning light, she stood at the stove making breakfast she wouldn't eat, going through motions that gave her something to focus on besides the hole that had opened in her life. Maria Castellano Romano was 56 years old, had come to Philadelphia from Palermo when she was 9, had married Salvatore when she was 22, had given him 3 sons and built a life in South Philadelphia that revolved around family, church, and the tight-knit Italian community that had sustained them for 33 years. She knew what her husband had done for a living, knew about the loan sharking, knew about the gray areas where legitimate business blurred into street work. She'd accepted it because Salvatore had been fair, had been careful, had provided for his family without bringing violence into their home. Until yesterday, when violence had come anyway and taken everything. She turned from the stove, looked at her 3 sons sitting at the table, and knew from their faces what they were planning. "You're going after them," she said. "Not a question." Vincent met her eyes. "Yes, all of them. Everyone involved." Maria nodded slowly. She should have told them to go to the police, to let the law handle it, to not throw their lives away on revenge. But she was from the old country, from a place where family handled its own justice, where the police were often worse than the criminals, where the code of omerta wasn't just tradition, it was survival. "Your father," she said quietly, "would tell you to be smart. Not to let anger make you stupid, to plan carefully." Vincent stood, crossed to his mother, put his hands on her shoulders. "We'll be careful, Ma. I promise. When it's done, when they've paid, we'll come home." She touched his face, looked at Michael, at Anthony. "You're all I have left. If I lose you too..." She shook her head, unable to finish. "You won't lose us," Anthony said, but he didn't sound convinced. For the next 12 days, the Romano brothers became ghosts. They closed the moving company, told employees there was a family emergency, suspended all jobs. They withdrew $20,000 cash from various accounts. They bought prepaid phones, used them once, and threw them away. They stopped going to places they normally went, stopped seeing people they normally saw, lived in the moving company office like it was a military outpost. Vincent took charge of surveillance, using skills the Army had taught him in Vietnam. Michael handled logistics and planning, creating detailed maps, timelines, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities. Anthony did the legwork, following targets, photographing locations, gathering intelligence. The T.E. started with Tommy Brennan himself. He lived in a loft in Old City, corner of 2nd and Market, 4th floor. Security was minimal, just a key code entry. March 20th, 1987, 2 in the afternoon. The Romano brothers sat in the moving company office, surrounded by maps, photographs, notebooks, filled with handwritten surveillance logs. 2 weeks of watching, learning, documenting had produced a complete picture of the South Street crews, operations, movements, vulnerabilities. But watching wasn't enough anymore. Planning wasn't enough. They needed weapons, and they needed a strategy that would let them eliminate 10 men in a single night without getting caught, killed, or leaving witnesses who could testify. Vincent spread a warehouse blueprint across the desk. "This is where we do it. Aramingo Avenue near Tioga Street, abandoned building, used to be a furniture warehouse. Tommy's crew stores product there sometimes, uses it as a meeting spot. Big open floor plan, only 2 exits, front and back. Windows are boarded up. If we can get them all inside, we control the environment completely." Michael studied the blueprint. How do we get them all there at once? These guys don't travel together except for major deals. They're spread across the city. Anthony leaned forward. We give them a reason. Make it worth their time. Something big enough that Tommy brings everyone for security. Like what? Michael asked. Vincent answered. Cocaine. A deal too good to pass up. We call Tommy, tell him we've got a Colombian contact. 50 kilos available immediately. Below market price. He'll need his whole crew to move that much product. To provide security for the buy. He shows up with everyone. We're waiting. Anthony nodded slowly. But we need to sound convincing. Tommy knows our voices. We'd have to disguise it, use someone he doesn't know, make it seem legitimate. I can handle that, Michael said. I'll alter my voice. Call from a burner phone. Give him a number to call back that goes to a different burner. Make it seem like a real operation. But even if we get them there, Vincent continued, we need to make sure nobody leaves. That means weapons, accelerants, and a plan that accounts for everything going wrong. They spent the next hour discussing details with the cold precision of men planning a military operation. Which weapons to acquire, how to acquire them without creating a trail, how much gasoline and accelerant they'd need, where to position themselves for maximum effectiveness, what to do if police showed up, if witnesses appeared, if anything deviated from the plan. Vincent had connections from Vietnam, guys who'd come home and stayed connected to the kinds of networks that moved illegal weapons. He made calls from a payphone on Washington Avenue, speaking in careful code, arranging purchases that would happen in parking lots and alleyways. By March 21st, they had assembled an arsenal. 3 9mm handguns, 2 shotguns, and 500 rounds of ammunition. 15 gallons of gasoline in plastic containers. 3 road flares as ignition sources. Work gloves, dark clothing, ski masks. Everything purchased with cash from different locations. Nothing traceable back to them. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Michael would make the call to Tommy Brennan on March 21st at 11 at night, late enough that Tommy would be awake and high, early enough that he could assemble his crew quickly. The offer would be 50 kilos of pure Colombian cocaine for $600,000, nearly 30% below street value. The location would be the Aramingo warehouse. The time would be 12:30 in the morning on March 22nd. March 21st, 1987, 11:07 at night. Michael Romano stood in a payphone booth on Broad Street, 5 blocks from City Hall, watching traffic pass under streetlights that turned the wet pavement orange. Temperature was 38 degrees, cold enough that his breath fogged the glass. He held a burner phone in one gloved hand, a piece of cloth in the other, that he'd hold over the mouthpiece to distort his voice. Vincent and Anthony sat in a van parked across the street watching, waiting. Michael had rehearsed what he'd say 20 times. He needed to sound professional, not threatening, businesslike, a real cocaine dealer making a real offer. He dialed Tommy Brennan's number, which they'd gotten from surveillance logs. The phone rang 3 times. Tommy answered, voice alert but slightly slurred. Yeah. This Tommy Brennan? Who's asking? My name doesn't matter. I got your number from mutual friends in Miami. I hear you move weight, you pay on time, you're professional. I like working with professionals. Tommy's voice sharpened. Suspicious, but interested. What kind of weight we talking about? 50 kilos, pure Colombian. Tested at 89%. I can do 600,000 for the lot. That's 30% below market. Tommy was quiet for a moment, calculating. Michael could hear music in the background. Voices. Tommy was at a club or a party somewhere public. Why so cheap? You trying to move bad product? Not bad product. Hot product. It came from a deal that went sideways in Miami. Guy who owned it is dead. His partners want it. Gone. Want cash. Want it tonight. I'm in Philadelphia for 12 hours, then I'm gone. You interested, or should I call someone else? Wait. How do I know this is real? How do I know you're not a cop? Because cops don't offer 50 kilos over the phone, Michael said, calmly. And if I was law enforcement, I'd be trying to get you to meet somewhere we control, not giving you location choice. I'm offering you a deal. Take it or don't. Your call. Where and when? Aramingo Avenue, near Tioga Street. Old furniture warehouse. Red brick, you can't miss it. 12:30 tonight. Bring your money, bring your people for security. I'll have the product. Tommy hesitated. That's Kensington. That's not neutral ground. It's the only ground I got. I don't know Philadelphia. This warehouse is empty, private, good for business. You don't like it, walk away. But this offer expires at 12:30. After that, I make another call. Michael could hear Tommy breathing, thinking, weighing risk against reward. 600,000 for 50 kilos was too good to pass up, even if it felt wrong. Greed would win. It always did. All right, Tommy said finally. 12:30. I'll be there. You better have my product. Michael smiled coldly. You better have my money. He hung up, walked to the van where Vincent and Anthony were waiting. Vincent looked at him. He take it? Hook, line, and sinker. He'll bring everyone. Michael climbed in. Now we wait. They drove to the warehouse on Aramingo Avenue, arriving at 11:40. The building sat in the middle of an industrial block, surrounded by other abandoned structures. No residential housing nearby. No late-night businesses. No reason for anyone to be in this area after dark. March 22nd, 1987, 12:15 in the morning. The Romano brothers had been inside the Aramingo warehouse for 30 minutes, preparing. The building was exactly as Vincent remembered from reconnaissance. One large open room, 50 feet by 80 feet, concrete floor, metal support beams, boarded windows, 2 exits. The front entrance faced the street, double doors that opened inward. The back exit led to an alley, single door, rusted hinges. Vincent positioned the moving van in the alley, blocking the back door completely. Even if someone managed to open it, they'd hit a wall of metal. Michael spread gasoline around the perimeter of the building, creating a border 20 feet from the walls. Not too close to the entrances yet. They needed Tommy and his crew to get inside first, to feel secure, before the trap closed. Anthony set up near the front entrance behind a stack of old wooden pallets that provided cover. He held a shotgun, checked it for the 4th time. His hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Vincent took position behind a metal support beam that gave him sight line to most of the warehouse floor. Michael waited near the side wall with the gasoline containers and road flares. The temperature inside was maybe 40 degrees, their breath visible in the darkness. The only light came from street lamps outside, filtering through gaps in the boarded windows, creating shadows that moved when wind rattled the building. At 12:23, they heard cars approaching. Multiple vehicles, engines cutting off, doors opening and closing, voices, footsteps. Tommy Brennan's voice, recognizable even muffled by walls. "All right, everyone stay sharp. We don't know this guy. Marcus, Danny, you come in with me. Kevin, you and the others stay outside, watch the perimeter. Anyone approaches who isn't us, you handle it." Vincent counted at least 8 distinct voices. Maybe all 10 crew members were here. Better than they'd hoped. The front doors opened slowly. 3 men entered. Tommy Brennan in front, Marcus Webb, and Danny Sullivan flanking him. They carried duffel bags, presumably full of cash. All 3 had pistols visible in shoulder holsters. They stopped 10 feet inside, looking around, eyes adjusting to the darkness. Tommy called out, "Yo, we're here. Where you at?" Vincent stepped out from behind the support beam. "Right here." Tommy spun, hand moving toward his gun, then freezing when he saw Vincent's face, recognition hitting like electricity. "You." "Vincent Romano. What the fuck is this?" "This is for my father," Vincent said calmly. His rifle was already raised, aimed at Tommy's chest. "You set him up, killed him like a dog, left him bleeding in a warehouse, just like this one." Tommy's face went white. "Look, man, that wasn't personal. That was business. Your old man was pressing me for money I didn't have. I had to make a move." "Business," Vincent repeated. "You killed my father over $85,000 and called it business." Tommy's hand moved. Vincent fired. The shot caught Tommy in the shoulder, spinning him, the duffel bag flying. Marcus and Danny drew their weapons. Anthony stepped out from behind the pallets, shotgun booming twice. Marcus went down immediately, chest torn open. Danny tried to run for the door. 12:47 in the morning, March 22nd. The warehouse had become a battlefield in the space of 90 seconds. The sound of gunfire echoed off concrete and metal, deafening in the enclosed space. Danny Sullivan made it 3 steps toward the door before Vincent's second shot hit him in the back, dropping him face first onto the concrete. Outside, the rest of the South Street crew heard the shooting and reacted exactly as Vincent had predicted. They came through the front entrance together, 7 men drawing weapons, shouting, trying to provide backup for their crew leader. Kevin O'Malley was first through the door, followed by Sean Murphy, Jake Delgado, Chris Martinez, Bobby Chen, Eric Walsh, and Tommy's younger brother, Patrick Brennan. They poured into the warehouse in a cluster, exactly the tactical mistake Vincent had counted on. Anthony opened fire from his position behind the pallets, the shotgun blast catching Sean Murphy in the chest. Vincent fired systematically from behind the support beam, each shot calculated, aimed, professional. Kevin O'Malley went down, then Jake Delgado. Michael emerged from the shadows, handgun raised, firing at Chris Martinez, who'd taken cover behind a metal barrel. The warehouse filled with gun smoke, the smell of cordant, the sound of men screaming and dying. Bobby Chen managed to return fire, his shots going wild, hitting walls and ceiling. One bullet passed so close to Anthony's head, he felt the displacement of air. Anthony ducked, rolled, came up firing, and Bobby went down, clutching his stomach. Eric Walsh tried to retreat, back through the front entrance, realized the door was now blocked by bodies, turned and ran for the back of the warehouse, searching desperately for another exit. He found the back door, yanked on it, discovered the van, blocking it from outside. Trapped. He spun around, saw Vincent approaching through the smoke. "Please, man, please. I didn't kill your father. I wasn't even there. I didn't know." "You knew after," Vincent said coldly. "You knew what Tommy did, and you stayed with him. That makes you complicit." Eric raised his pistol. Vincent shot him twice. Center mass. Professional. Efficient. Emotionless. Patrick Brennan, Tommy's 24-year-old brother, had taken cover behind a support beam, trying to understand what was happening, why Vincent Romano was systematically executing his crew. Patrick had grown up 3 blocks from Vincent, had played basketball with him when they were kids. He called out, voice cracking, "Vincent, stop this. Whatever Tommy did, the rest of us had nothing to do with it. We're just trying to make money." Vincent appeared from the smoke like a ghost. "Your brother killed my father, Patrick. Set him up, beat him, shot him, left him to die alone. You think I'm going to let his crew walk the streets like nothing happened? This is justice." "This isn't justice," Patrick screamed. "This is murder. You're killing us over something Tommy did." Vincent's face was stone. "You should have chosen better friends." He fired once. Patrick Brennan dropped. Tommy Brennan was still alive, wounded, dragging himself across the concrete floor toward the front entrance, leaving a blood trail behind him. His shoulder was shattered from Vincent's first shot, his right arm useless. He pulled himself with his left arm, inch by inch, survival instinct overriding pain. He'd almost reached the door when Anthony stepped in front of him, blocking his path. 1:03 in the morning, March 22nd. The gunfire had stopped. The warehouse was silent except for the sound of men breathing hard, the occasional groan from bodies not quite dead yet, the creak of the building settling. Gun smoke hung in the air like fog, thick enough to taste. 10 members of the South Street crew lay scattered across the concrete floor in various states of death and dying. Vincent walked among them, checking bodies, making sure. Marcus Webb was dead, eyes open, staring at nothing. Danny Sullivan was dead, face down in a pool of his own blood. Kevin O'Malley was dead. Sean Murphy was dead. Jake Delgado was still breathing, shallow and wet, blood bubbling from his mouth. Vincent stood over him for a moment, then fired once more. Jake stopped breathing. Chris Martinez was dead. Bobby Chen was dying, gut shot, curled on his side, making sounds that weren't quite words. Eric Walsh was dead. Patrick Brennan was dead. Tommy Brennan was the only one still fully conscious, still trying to crawl toward the door, still believing somehow he could survive this. Vincent grabbed him by the collar, dragged him to the center of the warehouse floor, dropped him there. Tommy rolled onto his back, gasping, his face pale from blood loss and shock. Anthony and Michael approached, standing over him in a semicircle. The 3 Romano brothers looking down at the man who'd destroyed their family. "Why'd you do it, Tommy?" Vincent asked quietly. "Why'd you kill my father?" Tommy coughed, blood on his lips. I told you. Business. I owed too much money to too many people. Killing Sal was easier than paying him. Easier, Vincent repeated. My father gave you chances, gave you extensions, treated you with respect because he knew your family. And you repaid that by setting him up for execution. Tommy tried to laugh. It came out as a wet cough. That's the thing you old school guys never understood. Respect doesn't pay bills. Respect doesn't buy product. Your father was living in the past, thinking neighborhood connections meant something. This is 1987, Vinny. The only thing that matters is money and power, and I didn't have enough of either to keep him happy. So yeah, I set him up. Would do it again if I had to. Anthony lunged forward. Michael grabbed him, held him back. Not yet. Vincent nodded to Michael, who moved to the perimeter where the gasoline had been poured earlier. Michael picked up the containers, walked around the warehouse, pouring gasoline over bodies, over wooden debris, creating an accelerant pattern that would ensure the fire spread quickly and burned hot enough to destroy evidence. Tommy watched, his eyes widening as he realized what was coming. You're gonna burn us? Vincent, come on, man. Just shoot me. Don't burn me alive. My father died alone on a concrete floor, Vincent said. Bleeding out from 2 gunshots, beaten, betrayed by someone he trusted. You think you deserve better? Michael finished pouring the gasoline, the smell overwhelming now, chemical and sharp. He picked up the road flares, positioned himself near the front entrance. Anthony stood by the back door, ready to move the van once they were outside. Vincent looked down at Tommy Brennan one last time. This is for Salvatore Romano. For every father whose son had to avenge him because the system failed. For every family destroyed by men like you who think respect is weakness and loyalty is a joke. 6:17 in the morning, March 22nd. Philadelphia Fire Department Engine 17 arrived at the warehouse on Aramingo Avenue to find the building fully engulfed, flames shooting through the roof, thick black smoke visible for miles. The call had come in at 1:30, anonymous, someone reporting an explosion and fire. By the time firefighters arrived, the building was beyond saving. They focused on containment, keeping the fire from spreading to adjacent structures, spraying water from multiple angles. It took 90 minutes to knock down the main fire, another 2 hours to fully extinguish hotspots. Fire Marshal David Patterson arrived at 7:15, surveyed the scene, and immediately knew this wasn't an accident. The burn pattern was wrong. Multiple points of origin, characteristic of accelerant use. The building's exits had been blocked, one by debris that appeared deliberately placed, the back door by fresh damage indicating a vehicle had been parked against it. And there was the smell, even through the smoke and wet ash, the chemical signature of gasoline. Patterson called Philadelphia Police Homicide Unit at 7:30. By 8 o'clock, the warehouse was a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the block. Patrol officers kept curious neighbors and news crews at distance. Fire investigators worked carefully through the debris, documenting everything, photographing burn patterns, collecting samples for lab analysis. At 8:45, they found the first body, burned beyond recognition, curled in the fetal position that indicated the victim had been alive when the fire started. By 9:30, they'd found 10 bodies total, scattered across what had been the warehouse floor, all showing the same heat damage, the same defensive positioning. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at 10 o'clock, 42 years old, 15 years with Philadelphia PD, 7 in homicide. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, Chinese American, had grown up in Chinatown, knew Philadelphia's criminal landscape intimately. She stood at the warehouse entrance looking at the devastation and felt cold certainty settle in her gut. This was execution followed by cover-up. Professional. Calculated. Someone had lured multiple people here, killed them, burned the evidence. She turned to Fire Marshal Patterson. "What do we know?" Patterson consulted his notes. Fire started approximately 1:30 in the morning based on the 911 call. Accelerant used, definitely gasoline, poured in a pattern designed for maximum spread. Exits were blocked, preventing escape. 10 bodies so far, probably more once we dig through all the debris. Dental records and DNA will be needed for identification. Any indication who the victims are? Not yet, but I found this. Patterson held up a plastic evidence bag containing a partially melted gold chain. Might give us something. Chen took the bag, examined it. Expensive jewelry. Drug dealers, maybe. She looked around the warehouse. Neighborhood. Kensington, industrial area, no residential nearby. Good place for drug deals or meetings that need privacy. Patterson nodded. I'm thinking the same. Someone set up a meet, brought multiple people here, ended them all at once. But why burn them? Why not just leave the bodies? Chen considered. Burning destroys forensic evidence, makes identification harder, buys time before we can notify families, start investigating connections. Whoever did this wanted to slow us down. She walked carefully through the scene, avoiding debris, studying the layout. Multiple shell casings visible despite the fire damage, indicating extensive gunfire before the blaze started. Blood spatter patterns on walls, though heat damaged and hard to read clearly. Detective Sarah Chen spent the next 4 days building a case from ashes and silence. The 10 bodies recovered from the Aramingo warehouse fire were sent to the medical examiner's office, where forensic pathologist Dr. Alan Kramer began the painstaking process of identification. Dental records would take weeks. DNA analysis would take longer. But by March 24th, 72 hours after the fire, Kramer had preliminary findings. All 10 victims were male, ages approximately 20 to 35 based on bone density and skeletal development. All showed evidence of gunshot wounds, bullets, or fragments recovered from 7 of the bodies despite fire damage. Cause of death for most was gunfire, not smoke inhalation or burns, meaning they'd been killed before the fire started. Time of death estimated between midnight and 2 in the morning on March 22nd. This confirmed Chen's initial assessment. Multiple homicides followed by arson to destroy evidence. But the question remained, who were the victims and who killed them? The break came on March 25th when a worried girlfriend reported her boyfriend missing. Marcus Webb, 28 years old, hadn't been home in 4 days, wasn't answering his phone, had missed work at a restaurant where he supposedly worked part-time. The girlfriend, Jennifer Lyons, told the responding officer that Marcus had mentioned a big deal happening Saturday night, said he'd be home late, never came home at all. The officer, knowing about the warehouse fire and the 10 unidentified bodies, forwarded the information to Chen. Chen pulled Marcus Webb's records. 2 arrests for cocaine possession, both dismissed. Known associate of Thomas Brennan, who himself had 3 arrests for drug trafficking, all cases pending. Thomas Brennan, address in Old City, hadn't been seen since March 21st. Chen felt pieces clicking into place. She contacted other precincts, asked about missing persons reports filed in the past week, found 6 more. Danny Sullivan, reported missing by his mother. Kevin O'Malley, reported missing by his roommate. Sean Murphy, Chris Martinez, Bobby Chen, all reported missing by family or friends in the past 72 hours. All known associates of Thomas Brennan, all connected to cocaine distribution in Center City and South Philadelphia. Chen now had probable identifications for 7 of the 10 bodies. She obtained dental records, sent them to the medical examiner. By March 26th, 6 days after the fire, they had confirmed matches. Marcus Webb, Danny Sullivan, Kevin O'Malley, Sean Murphy, Chris Martinez, and Bobby Chen, all members of the South Street crew, all dead in a warehouse fire that was looking more and more like a targeted hit. Chen pulled Thomas Brennan's file, studied it carefully. Born 1952, grew up in South Philadelphia, no college education, worked briefly in construction before transitioning to full-time drug dealing in the mid-1980s. Known to move significant quantities of cocaine, had connections throughout Philadelphia's criminal underworld. But who wanted him and his entire crew dead? Chen started interviewing informants, street sources, people who moved in Philadelphia's drug trade circles. The responses were consistent. Tommy Brennan owed money to multiple people, had a reputation for making promises he didn't keep, had recently missed payments to a loan shark named Salvatore Romano. Chen pulled Romano's name, found the death report filed March 8th. Salvatore Romano, 58, found dead in a Kensington warehouse, 2 gunshots, ruled homicide. Case still open, no arrests. She read the investigating officer's notes. March 26th, 1987, 2 in the afternoon. Detective Sarah Chen sat across the desk from Lieutenant Frank Morrison, head of Philadelphia Police Homicide Unit, laying out her theory. The South Street crew was executed in retaliation for killing Salvatore Romano. The Romano family, specifically his 3 sons, had motive, means, and opportunity. Morrison, 53 years old, 30 years with Philadelphia PD, listened carefully. His office was cluttered with case files, coffee cups, photographs of crime scenes that represented decades of the city's violence. He'd seen revenge killings before, but nothing on this scale. You're saying 3 guys killed 10 people in one night, then burned the warehouse to cover it? Morrison asked. That's exactly what I'm saying, Chen replied. Vincent Romano served in Vietnam combat experience, knows weapons and tactics. Michael Romano worked in the family moving business, has access to vehicles and equipment. Anthony Romano is the muscle, loyal to his brothers, willing to do whatever they ask. All 3 had motive after their father was murdered. All 3 disappeared from their usual routines right after Salvatore's death. Morrison studied the photos spread across his desk. Bodies from the warehouse. Surveillance images of the Romano brothers. Timeline charts Chen had created. What's your evidence? Physical evidence is thin, Chen admitted. The fire destroyed most of it, but we have witness reports of a van matching the Romano brothers' moving truck parked near the warehouse on the night of the fire. We have phone records showing multiple calls from burner phones to Tommy Brennan's number on March 21st. And we have motive. Tommy Brennan killed their father. This is classic vendetta. Morrison nodded slowly. Vendetta's one thing. 10 bodies is another. You think you can prove this in court? I think I can get enough for arrest warrants, Chen said. Then we pressure them during interrogation. See if one breaks. Maybe offer the youngest brother a deal if he testifies against the other two. Morrison picked up his phone. Let's bring them in. At 4:30 that afternoon, 6 Philadelphia police patrol cars surrounded the Romano family home on Tasker Street. 12 officers, all armed, positioned at front and back entrances. Chen and her partner, Detective Mike Torres, approached the front door. Chen knocked, waited. Maria Romano answered, saw the police, understood immediately. Her face went gray. They're not here, she said quietly. Where are they, Mrs. Romano? Chen asked gently. I don't know. They left this morning, said they had business to handle. Said they'd be back for dinner. Chen didn't believe her. But pushing wouldn't help. We need to speak with Vincent, Michael, and Anthony. It's regarding the fire on Aramingo Avenue. Have them call me when they return. She handed Maria a business card. Maria took it, said nothing, closed the door. Chen turned to Torres. Put surveillance on the house. They'll come back eventually. But the Romano brothers were smarter than that. They'd anticipated police interest, had prepared. At 6:15 that evening, acting on a tip Chen received from an anonymous caller, officers found Vincent, Michael, and Anthony at Romano Brothers Moving and Storage on Washington Avenue. They weren't hiding, weren't running, just sitting in the office drinking coffee like it was a normal workday. Chen entered with 4 uniformed officers backing her up. Vincent, Michael, Anthony Romano, you're under arrest for 10 counts of first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of Thomas Brennan and 9 others. September 15th, 1988, 18 months after the Aramingo warehouse fire. The trial of Vincent, Michael, and Anthony Romano concluded in a Philadelphia courtroom, packed with family members, reporters, and curious observers who'd followed the case through every development. Judge Patricia Hernandez, presiding, 59 years old, 23 years on the bench, known for fairness and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney David Klein, had built a circumstantial case. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses who'd actually seen the Romano brothers at the warehouse, but they had motive, they had timeline, they had evidence of planning. Phone records showing burner calls, witness testimony about the moving van, trace evidence of accelerants found on clothing seized from Anthony Romano's apartment. Most damaging was the testimony from Jennifer Lyons, Marcus Webb's girlfriend, who told the jury that Marcus had mentioned Tommy Brennan was nervous about meeting someone on March 21st, that Tommy thought it might be a setup, but the money was too good to pass up. The defense 3 court-appointed attorneys who'd worked pro bono because the Romano family couldn't afford private counsel argued self-defense and extreme emotional disturbance. They painted a picture of 3 sons driven to desperate acts after their father's brutal murder, acting not from malice, but from grief and the failure of law enforcement to protect their family. They brought in expert witnesses on post-traumatic stress, on the cultural codes of South Philadelphia's Italian community, on the economic devastation that had turned neighborhoods into war zones where official justice was a fantasy. Vincent Romano took the stand in his own defense against his attorney's advice. He sat in the witness box, looked directly at the jury, and told the truth. My father was murdered by Thomas Brennan over a debt. Tommy set him up, beat him, shot him, left him to die. We went to that warehouse on March 22nd to get justice the only way left to us. Did we kill them? Yes. Do I regret it? I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret protecting my family's honor when no one else would. The prosecution destroyed him on cross-examination. Klein walked Vincent through every death, made him acknowledge each killing, forced him to admit the planning, the premeditation, the cold calculation. By the time Vincent left the stand, the jury had seen not a grieving son, but a methodical killer who'd executed 10 people without mercy. The jury deliberated for 41 hours over 6 days. Guilty on all charges, all 3 defendants. Sentencing came 3 weeks later on October 6th, 1988. Vincent Romano, as the primary shooter and planner, received life without possibility of parole. Michael Romano received 60 years. Anthony Romano received 50 years. When Judge Hernandez read the sentences, Maria Romano sat in the front row of the gallery, tears streaming down her face, silent. She'd lost her husband to violence, now lost her 3 sons to the justice system. Everything gone in 7 months. Vincent turned in his seat, met his mother's eyes, mouthed the words, "I love you." She nodded, unable to speak. The brothers were let out in handcuffs, separated immediately, sent to different facilities. Vincent went to State Correctional Institution Graterford, maximum security. Michael went to SCI Huntington. Anthony went to SCI Rockview. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections ensured they'd never be housed together, never be able to coordinate, never be able to plan anything again.